what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to associate a unique identifier with the anonymous ID that's there by default. So what I tried doing previously is I tried using the G-glitch from Google Ads to populate the user ID, but I understand it can't do that. My other option is I'm trying to use the Amplitude ID, which is obviously populated per new session, feed that into the user ID and send that to Google Ads for the cohort audiences. So I just want to see if you have any documentation or anything kind of walk me through to get through this.
What's the objective for you to send through a user ID into Google Ads itself?
Well, we're trying to use it for remarketing. So I'm trying to use something that's already auto-populated. And I thought the Amplitude ID would make the most sense.
The thing is, if you look at identity resolution with an Amplitude, it actually resolves identities at two levels. One is the device ID, which is what auto-generated through the cookie if you're using a client-side library, right? It's the one that you will be stored in the browser, which will be persistent across sessions, but not devices, right? It's a setting. And then the other one is user ID, which is basically if you have a website or a platform with a login, which is the ID that you would distribute to consistently recognize a user across time, right? The relationship between user ID and device ID, there's one user ID and you can have multiple device IDs. The identify call will resolve everything over time. So if I switch devices, I'll get a new device ID, but I log in, same user ID. The thing with Amplitude ID itself, Amplitude ID is the back office ID that Amplitude uses in order to calibrate everything. It's like how a user is known within the Amplitude environment. I work with user ID and then device ID with identify calls, and you'll see that over time, you'll have multiple device IDs linked to one user ID, and they will always go back to one Amplitude ID, right? So the relationship, as far as we're concerned, is one-to-one between Amplitude ID and user ID. The thing that I feel like is you could capture the GCL ID in a track call or something else, just as a custom property, just as an event property or something else, or even store it on top of the user's profile, depending on your use case. So the only thing I can think of is the GCL ID, because that lives in Google's system and they can match with it, right? The Amplitude ID to start with won't work because Google has no notion of that. So they can't match it with any of the info in their system. So the alternatives is probably hashed PII, like email addresses, phone numbers, those type of things.
We don't have login information. These are for just visitors, site visitors. The purpose is remarketing. So what other options do we have? Like if we don't have a login.
But if you want really honestly a quick and dirty solution, deploy a remarketing tag through GTM and take it outside of Amplitude. Because Amplitude will work best using a piece of PII info in order to pass that on to the cohort.
On the CDP note, we're trying to use Amplitude as a CDP. So like we need some kind of a unique identifier for that. If we don't have login information, would you just wait for an email address, keep them anonymous until we get some solid user identity?
Yeah, I think pages or websites or environments where it's about lead management. It's like we wouldn't go for any piece of email or identity form. Everything that's linked to a form is a good way to set a user ID at that point. We call it the identification rate. It's an idea of like how efficient is your asset, read your website, in transforming unknown users into known users.
Well, this has been very helpful. I appreciate the advice.